If you want to customize your own computer without having to buy tools or spend a bunch of time in the workshop, you should check out v1tech.com. You can find professionally made mods like GPU backplates, sleeve cables, fan grills, and a bunch of other stuff, and you can use the discount code DietecMods at checkout for 10% off any purchase. More info in the description. Hey, I'm Dietec, and I like to modify computers, and this channel on YouTube has always been about kind of archiving as well as just showing off all of the mods that I've done, so from the very first mod that I ever did until the rest of them. And to that end, now that I have been modding for a little over 2 years or something, I wanted to kind of make a recap of the earlier mods, because I don't necessarily want to have those older videos on my channel anymore. I've improved in my quality of mods and in production quality quite a bit, and I kind of want to just keep the better stuff on there and kind of get rid of the older, worse stuff. But I still want to have that archive of all of the progress that I've made from the very first mod on, so that is what this video is for. I am combining all of the first year videos. Year one of me modding computers, every single mod that I did in the first year of my modding career will be on this video right here. And I certainly made a whole bunch of mistakes during that time, so I will be kind of explaining what I did badly and what I would still do now, and kind of like the different methods and stuff that I used in those videos. Just so that hopefully you can kind of, one, just see the progress that I made over the first year of my modding career, and two, kind of learn from the mistakes that I made during that time and not repeat them yourself if you are also looking to get into modding for the first time yourself. As always, check the description for links to all of the things that I mentioned in the video, as well as my social media accounts and all of that kind of stuff. So my very first case mod ever was basically just manipulating and painting acrylic, and actually you can see that I've already made a few mistakes, that being I drew Sharpie lines onto the actual acrylic itself, like right onto the plastic, instead of putting it over some kind of tape or something like that. If you do that, you will see that through the paint. If you don't like sand the acrylic down first and get that Sharpie off of there, it does show through the paint. So best practice that I've found is to put some painter's tape over your acrylic before you draw anything on it, like any kind of lines that you're trying to cut out. And when I bent everything, I didn't use a clamp or anything, I just used the side of a table. That is not ideal either. Usually you want to use a piece of wood on top and some clamps to hold that stuff down onto the table, just so that you can get the cleanest line possible. But this was my first mod ever, and I didn't have all kinds of tools, and I was just kind of a hack, so this is how I did it. Oh, another thing that I didn't do great in this very first mod was using sticker paper instead of vinyl to make my stencils for painting. It's not the best way to do it. Vinyl is definitely what you should use. It makes nice and clean lines, and if you use sticker paper, which is way cheaper and you can print things on it and everything, it's convenient, I thought at the time. But when you use it, your spray paint will seep down into the sides of it and make it look terrible. So don't use sticker paper. And there it is, first mod ever. Honestly, if you're going to do acrylic mods like this, just buy them from v1tech.com, because they're going to come out perfect and look awesome, and it's going to be great the very first time. Only really do this yourself if you're planning on just learning how to mod, and in that case, eventually, if you stick to it, you will have a nice looking computer from your own hand. The second mod I did was still just acrylic and paint, but I was a little more ambitious this time, and I think it came out way better. I did learn how to use acrylic cement during this mod, and that is pretty cool. You should only use it when things aren't painted, and I did make that mistake in a few mods in the future from this one, but in this particular case it was a-okay because all of the acrylic layering that I did were unpainted as of this point. And creating the vinyl stencils without a vinyl cutter, all I had was just a knife. That was actually pretty cool. It's definitely a way that I would suggest people do it if they don't have the budget for a vinyl cutter. It's still the way that I would do it if I didn't have one myself. Honestly, you just need a steady hand and it could come out looking perfect. And you can see in the video, I'm using this like specifically designed vinyl transfer paper. You actually don't even need that. You could just use painter's tape, which is actually what I still use to this day. I switched over from this like transfer paper over to painter's tape, and actually I feel like it works way better, to be honest. But I do have to say again, just make sure you're using vinyl as your stencil instead of something like sticker paper, because you want those clean lines. It looks way better if you use vinyl. Oh, and there's two different types of vinyl too. There's like indoor vinyl and outdoor vinyl. The outdoor vinyl is just stickier on the back. It's just meant to kind of withstand some elements or whatever. And that's kind of what I would suggest using, is the outdoor stuff. You can still pull it off of whatever it is you're painting just fine, as long as you have like a knife to slide underneath it just to get that first little grip on there. And that's what you want for those clean lines. The indoor vinyl is just not sticky enough, I think. So with this third mod here, I wanted to try something a little bit different with attaching my mods to the side of my case. So I drilled a whole bunch of holes in the case and I tapped them to put like threads into them, and then I screwed on a bunch of acrylic pieces that I had cut out into this cool pattern here. I think I found this pattern on the internet, and I think I found the idea of screwing it on the internet as well. I saw it in like somebody else's case mod and I was like, oh, I want to try that. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do this again. I mean, it's not a bad method of doing it, but I would just say I probably wouldn't do it again unless it specifically went with the theme of the case mod. Like if I was doing some kind of like, I don't know, like a BioShock themed case or something like that, where a lot of rivets and screws and things would actually kind of go with the theme a little bit more. I mean, it's not like a bad method of attaching things, but you could just use double-sided tape and that would be way easier and it would work just as well. So you would do this more so for the aesthetic reasons, I think. But it was cool that I did it. I learned something and now I can do this in the future if I ever feel so inclined. As for the color theme of this case, I don't know why I chose the green and the white and the gray. I just kind of was like, hey, it would be cool to do like a green case, and then I started and it was too late to turn back, I think, at that point. Anyway, this next case mod here that I did, mostly just painting the case, I got a vinyl cutter, a silhouette portrait vinyl cutter, and I wanted to kind of test it out and see what I could do with making a cool design paint job on this case. So basically I just cut a couple of vinyl stencils and I painted them onto the case, but I did actually learn some stuff during this mod. The first thing being, I actually used the indoor type vinyl stuff on this for the stencils here, and I learned that it's not so good. It's way better to do the outdoor type. And when I say like an indoor outdoor type of vinyl, I don't know if there's actually more types than that, but if you search vinyl on Amazon, then those are the two things that you see. So I'm just saying that that's a thing. So lesson learned, use the outdoor type vinyl, and second lesson, just get better at painting. I mean, I suck at painting, guys. I'm really, really bad at it. I mean, all my paint jobs come out like pretty decent looking, but I have a long way to go. Painting is actually hard. Like, if you guys are good painters, like, you have a real valuable skill there. When I first started painting these case mods, like, I kind of watched some videos on how to do it, and people were like, yeah, do multiple light coats of paint. I did just a whole bunch of, like, heavy coats, and I didn't even wait for them to dry in between. I just did, like, a coat, and then 5 minutes later, while it was still wet, I did another coat. I thought that was the way you paint, but it totally isn't. You're supposed to do some light coats. Doesn't even matter if you can still see the background color through that first couple of light coats. Just real light dusting at first, and then you kind of wait for it to be dry to the touch. So, you know, an hour or two or whatever. Then you do a couple more coats and just keep doing that until it is the way you want it to be. Painting correctly takes a whole bunch of time, and you have to be patient, and that is something that I am not. I'm typically not a very patient person, so it's something I kind of have to learn if I want to be better at case modding. So up to this point, you've been kind of seeing me paint the wrong way, pretty much. And another mistake that I'm making on this Xbox case mod right here is I painted a piece of acrylic, and then afterwards I put the acrylic cement on there because I wanted to attach it to this other clear piece here. That's not typically the way that you want to do this. The acrylic cement, if it gets on the paint, which it absolutely will, it's really hard to not get this stuff on the paint if it's an already painted piece of acrylic. It will kind of melt through it and ruin your paint job. So, best practice that I've found is to use double-sided VHB tape. It's really, really, really thin and super strong tape, and it's basically just like welding the thing on there anyway. It's that strong, so that's the way that you don't have to worry about ruining your paint job. Now this next one is actually my dad's computer now. He uses this as his kind of daily driver, and I think that's pretty cool. I cut a hole into the front panel. I did this pretty much just for like proof of concept airflow. This case doesn't necessarily need all that extra airflow, but I did it anyway because, hey, why not? You could just improve the airflow, whatever. And actually that mesh that I used as like a dust cover sort of thing I got it at Staples, actually. It's meant to be like a paper holder, and I just cut it up so that I had like a flat piece of mesh, and I epoxied it to the front panel, the back of the front panel, that is. And that is absolutely something that I would do again if I was in this position. I can't particularly think of a better way to do this, I'd probably just use epoxy again. I would call it best practice even. Why not? And really the reason that I like this case mod particularly, and why I'm glad it's kind of sticking around, is this paint job that I did on the motherboard and the power supply shroud and everything like that. I used just some Rust-Oleum enamel spray paint, and I just sprayed it into the cap of the spray paint, and I used the paintbrush to paint the entire thing. And it was painstaking, and it is certainly not perfect looking whatsoever, but it still looks pretty awesome to me. And even now, I can't really think of a better way to go about painting your motherboard like that if you're trying to do a specific design. Like, this enamel spray paint is kind of something you'd want to use because it's non-conductive and heat resistant and all that stuff. So as far as I'm concerned, if I was going to paint my motherboard in a specific design again, I'd probably do it exactly the same way even now. But if you have a better idea, then I would love to hear it. And this next mod was the first time that I ever tried playing around with like backlighting acrylic, and I wanted to do like a lit up part on the front panel that turns on when the computer turns on, like a big power button LED kind of. And it was relatively successful, except for the fact that the LED light, the actual shining part that you see, is not at all like even. And that's just because of the LEDs that I used. It took me a while to figure out really the best way to do the LEDs. Honestly, the best way is to just get side emitting LEDs and put them right next to your acrylic. And I get all of my side emitting LEDs from V1 Tech. And you can get them there as well. I'm sure there are other places to get them, but I particularly love those guys. I mean, they're really nice, like in real life, they're really nice people, and I want to support them as much as I can. Hassan, the dude that runs that website, is like really passionate about PC modding, and he's just like really just out there to make a good product instead of like run a successful business. Like, he's there for the customer experience rather than the money, you know what I mean? And that's not him like paying me to say that or anything. Like, I just genuinely just want them to be successful because they're awesome and they're really good for the PC modding just world in general. So speaking of like backlighting things, this next mod I wanted to backlight the power supply shroud, and I wanted to cut out an intricate design onto it, like this InWin logo right here. All I used was a Dremel and a file just to get this thing all cut out, and honestly, I would do that again. It's something that isn't really possible to do any other way except for if you have like a CNC machine, but those are really expensive. So, and actually, to be honest, like I have a CNC machine and I still would cut out something like this with a Dremel if I didn't have to do some kind of really complicated design. Like something like this totally would do with a Dremel. For real, if you're trying to get into PC modding, you should just, the first tool that you should ever buy is really just a Dremel. Like, buy a Dremel and then probably a drill. I don't know. Honestly, you can do some like really cool stuff with just a Dremel. Like, this InWin logo came out pretty good. I'm proud of it. So there's the InWin 301 mod finished. First time ever cutting a relatively complicated design into metal, so that's cool. And actually a mistake that I made on that, well, not really a mistake, but like I could have improved that case mod by using a hole saw, a 4.5-inch hole saw for the front two holes for the fans, instead of using my jigsaw. That just would have made the job a little bit easier. I mean, it still came out good, but you know, best practices and stuff. I would use a hole saw in the future. This next mod was actually a collaboration between me and my wife. She did all of the clay sculpting portions of it. She's an amazing clay artist, and I plan to use her skills many more times in the future. But for this particular one, we used clay that you needed to heat up in the oven in order to get it to harden, which I actually no longer use. I use epoxy clay now, which hardens on its own. I would say that's the better idea, but we happen to use this other clay that you need to heat up, so we had to put it on a piece of metal first, like a separate piece of metal that we could put in the oven, because obviously we can't put the entire computer case in the oven, since that would melt like the plastic parts of it and whatnot. So we sculpted the clay onto this piece of metal, and then we heated it up so that it would harden, and then we riveted the piece of metal onto the case itself. But if you use epoxy clay, like I would suggest that you do, and that I do now for all of my clay sculptures, then you don't have to put it in the oven, and you don't have to use a separate piece of metal. You can just put it directly onto your computer case and kind of avoid that whole situation. But either way, this one came out really good, and we painted it with just some acrylic paint and then sprayed over the acrylic paint with clear coat so that it would be a little bit more durable. And the mod itself just came out pretty awesome. I like this one quite a bit, actually. And I used some magnetic tape for the side panel, and it's actually holding onto like a really thin piece of metal, so it's not like super well on there, but it does work, and it's going to stay on there just fine as long as you don't knock around your computer too much, which I don't think that you should be doing that anyway. So yeah, there is definitely situations in the future where I would continue to use magnetic tape to hold on the side panel, for example. Okay, so my wife did the last clay mod, and I wanted to give it a try this time, so I decided to do a Doom-themed case with some clay. I just used the same kind of clay as last time, the kind that you have to heat up in order for it to harden. I haven't discovered epoxy clay yet at this point. And I used tinfoil to kind of take up the space underneath the clay just so I don't have to use like a giant slab of clay in order to sculpt my whatever I'm trying to sculpt. Which is absolutely something you should be doing if you're going to be making kind of a thick piece of clay. You should put something underneath it so that it doesn't have to be just 100% clay. And again, I just used acrylic paint and a clear coat to get this thing looking nice. As for the side panel, I cut it out with a Dremel, and again, the Dremel is like, you can do some pretty intricate stuff with this thing. It's pretty great. But one kind of mistake that I did make with the side panel is just the fact that I was just ignorant in the way of side emitting LEDs at the time. I was still trying to figure out how to best backlight a piece of acrylic, so the backlit portion of this side panel is not fully completely like lit up. There's a little bit of a empty spot in the middle there. I mean, when you turn off the light it looks fine, but in the daytime you can pretty clearly see that the light doesn't go all the way through the piece of acrylic, and that just doesn't look as professional as you would want it to look. So again, pretty much just whenever you want to backlight something, just always use side emitting LEDs, because that is really the best way to do it. And I hope the fact that I'm pointing out all of these mistakes or like inefficiencies or like just lack of knowledge in certain things as I go through all these videos, I hope you're kind of learning from my mistakes so that you don't have to learn the hard way and make those mistakes yourself. I mean, a lot of these little tips are just like really simple stuff. It's just like the obviously better way to do it. So if I knew about these things beforehand, these mods probably would have come out even better than they did. But I guess sharing what I learned during like the first year of me modding is the entire point of making this video. So yeah, I made a whole bunch of mistakes, and hopefully you can avoid those same mistakes. And you can see at this point in my modding career, I learned the power of VHB tape, this super strong double-sided tape that is basically like the equivalent of the acrylic cement there. If you put enough of this tape on the back of a piece of acrylic and then you tape it to a front panel, for example, like I'm doing in this video, if you try to pull that piece of acrylic off, you're more likely to actually break it rather than pull it off. That's how strong this stuff is. It's hard to use on like really small pieces of plastic or really small things that you're trying to push together just because it's, you know, half an inch thick or whatever. So if you're doing anything that's less than half an inch thick, then you're going to have to cut the tape, and that's just kind of a huge pain. But anything bigger than half an inch, like this stuff is the way to go for sure. And you can also see another example of that mistake that I just made a few times where I used vinyl on the back of my piece of acrylic that I'm trying to backlight instead of painting the back of it white. If you paint the back of it white, it looks nice and smooth and clean, but if you use vinyl, then you'll get some air bubbles, and you'll be able to see those air bubbles when you're looking at it, and you can kind of see that here in this section of video as well. So don't be like me and use vinyl on the back of your whatever you're trying to light up. Just paint it, you know, wait the extra drying time, it's worth it. And this final mod here that I did in the first year of my modding career, I didn't actually use any kind of new methods that I hadn't used before, so there's not a whole lot to explain here. This case, the P400, I believe it was. It has kind of like notorious airflow issues, so I decided to try to fix that by cutting a couple holes in the front panel for the fans to intake a little bit more air through. Just made up some cool little design and cut it out, and just used the same exact method that I've used in the past with a kind of mesh paper holder that I cut up, epoxied it to the back, painted the whole thing. And what was different about this particular case mod is it is the first time that I ever did a fully custom water cooling loop, like a hardline loop, that is. I think despite it being my first time, the water loop that I made came out really nice looking. Except, like, water cooling is super expensive, so I'm probably not going to be doing that for my own personal builds pretty much ever. I will do it again for, like, show builds and mods and stuff, but on my own builds, nah, air cooling is fine. This case mod was my daily driver for a while as well. I don't really remember how long I had it, but it definitely sat in my living room for quite a while. Just a fun fact. So that's it. That is all of the mods from the very first one that I ever did until exactly 1 year later. I did 12 mods in total, and one of them was an Xbox. The rest of them were computers. I definitely learned quite a bit from that whole year of doing things, and on the YouTube side, I got way better at making videos too. Production quality and just general nervousness went away, so that's cool too. So hopefully me laying out all the experience that I gained over the first year of me modifying computer cases kind of helped you learn a couple of lessons just from my mistakes and all of the errors and whatever that I did. I could probably do this kind of thing for every consecutive year that I decide to continue modifying cases, just so that you can kind of see all in one video every year of progress that I make. That seems kind of cool to me. And again, check out the description for a link to V1 Tech, as well as all of my social media accounts and a bunch of tools and stuff that I mentioned in this video. And I guess that's it, so I will see you in the next one.